Welcome to Awaken Soul, a gateway to profound near-death experiences and spiritual revelations. Here, we share true stories of those who have glimpsed the afterlife, encountered divine beings like Jesus, Mother Mary, and the Supreme Creator, and return transformed. Their journeys remind us that Earth is merely a training ground for the soul to grow in wisdom, compassion, and love. Beyond this 3D world lies our true home. Are you ready to awaken? And remember, subscribe now to watch authentic NDE videos every day and uncover the truth beyond this world.
I died, but Jesus revealed 5 events that will happen in 2025. Jesus' NDE shocking testimony. David Miller was a man of routines and quiet resilience. At 45, he ran a small plumbing business in Charleston, South Carolina, a city steeped in history and charm, yet increasingly vulnerable to the whims of the Atlantic. He wasn't a man of grand ambitions, content with the simple rhythm of his days, fixing leaky faucets, unclogging drains, and providing a service that kept the city's underbelly flowing smoothly. He was a veteran, having served a tour in Afghanistan years ago, an experience that had left him with a quiet intensity and a deep appreciation for the fragility of life. He wasn't haunted by his past, but it had shaped him, made him more grounded, more aware of the things that truly mattered. His marriage to Sarah had ended amicably 5 years prior. They had simply grown apart, their paths diverging like two streams separating in a forest. They shared custody of their 2 children, Emily, 14, and Ben, 10, the anchors of his life, the reasons he worked so hard and strived to be a better man. Charleston, with its cobblestone streets, antebellum architecture, and salty sea air, was his home. He loved the city's history, its resilience, its unique blend of southern charm and coastal grit. But lately, a subtle unease had begun to settle over him, a feeling that something was out of balance. The news was a constant source of anxiety. Rising sea levels threatening the city's historic waterfront, increasingly intense hurricanes battering the coast, economic instability rattling the nation, and political divisions widening the gap between people. He wasn't a political man, nor was he particularly religious. He'd been raised Baptist, but his faith had become more of a cultural habit than a deeply held conviction. He wasn't looking for signs of the apocalypse, but he couldn't shake the feeling that the world was teetering on the edge of something unpredictable. He worried about his children's future, about the kind of world they would inherit. He felt a growing sense of responsibility, a need to do something, but he didn't know what. One sweltering afternoon in August, David was working on a particularly challenging plumbing issue in an old house in the historic district. The heat was oppressive, the humidity thick enough to choke on. He was crouched under a sink, wrestling with a stubborn pipe, sweat dripping from his brow. He felt a sudden, sharp pain in his chest, a crushing pressure that stole his breath. He gasped, clutching at his chest, his vision blurring. He collapsed onto the damp floor, the wrench clattering beside him. The last thing he saw was the intricate pattern of the antique tiles, distorted and fading. Before darkness swallowed him whole, the pain vanished. It was replaced by a sensation of weightlessness, of floating free from his body. He looked down and saw himself lying on the floor, his face pale, his body still. He saw the homeowner, a frail elderly woman, frantically calling 911, her voice trembling with panic. He felt no fear, no anxiety. A profound sense of peace washed over him, a tranquility he had never experienced before. The sounds of the woman's cries, the distant wail of sirens, faded into a muffled hum. He was aware of a presence beside him, a gentle, guiding force. He didn't see anyone, but he felt a warmth, a love that was both familiar and overwhelming. He began to move, not of his own volition, but drawn by an irresistible force. He was rising, floating upwards, effortlessly passing through the ceiling of the house, the roof, the sky above. He was moving through a tunnel, a darkness that was not frightening, but rather comforting, like being cradled in a soft, warm embrace. The darkness began to recede, replaced by a soft, radiant light at the end of the tunnel. The light grew brighter, more intense, yet it didn't hurt his eyes. It was a light unlike anything he had ever seen, a light that seemed to emanate from within, a light that was both light and love. The sense of peace intensified, becoming almost unbearable in its beauty. All his earthly concerns, his worries about his business, his children, his bills, all vanished completely. He felt whole, complete, loved in a way that transcended human understanding. He knew with absolute certainty that he was going home. The light enveloped him completely, and David found himself in a realm that defied all earthly comprehension. It wasn't a place with physical dimensions, but rather a state of being, a dimension of pure energy and consciousness. Colors existed that he had never seen before, vibrant and alive, resonating with an inner light. Sounds were not heard, but felt, harmonies that vibrated deep within his soul. He was not alone. He saw figures, shimmering and radiant, beings of light that emanated love and compassion. He recognized some of them. His grandfather, a gruff but kind man who had taught him how to fish, was there, his eyes twinkling with warmth. His best friend from high school, killed in a car accident decades ago, greeted him with a familiar grin. Even his old dog, Buster, a loyal Labrador who had been his companion for years, bounded towards him, tail wagging furiously. These encounters were wordless, yet filled with profound understanding. Thoughts, emotions, and memories flowed between them effortlessly, a seamless exchange of love and recognition. He felt a sense of belonging, of connection, that he had never fully experienced on Earth. He realized that he was not separate from them, that they were all part of a larger whole, a universal consciousness. Then a figure approached him, radiating a light that was even more intense than the others. This being didn't have a defined form, but David felt a presence of immense wisdom, compassion, and authority. This was his guide, a being tasked with helping him understand what he was about to experience. The guide communicated with him telepathically, its thoughts flowing directly into his mind. It explained that David had been brought to this realm for a specific purpose, to witness a series of visions, glimpses of potential futures, warnings, and messages of hope. The guide emphasized that these were not fixed prophecies, but rather representations of the consequences of choices, both individual and collective. David felt a mixture of awe and apprehension. He didn't understand why he had been chosen, but he trusted the guide's presence, the overwhelming sense of love and purpose that permeated this realm. He was ready to see what he was meant to see. The guide led David to a vantage point, a shift in perspective that allowed him to observe the first vision. It began with images of towering skyscrapers, symbols of wealth and power, but they were crumbling, their glass facades shattering, their foundations cracking. He saw stock market charts plummeting, not as abstract numbers, but as the representation of lost livelihoods, shattered dreams, and widespread financial ruin. He saw long lines of people queuing for food, their faces etched with hunger and desperation. He saw homeless encampments spreading through cities, symbols of a society that had failed to care for its most vulnerable. It wasn't just about money, it was about the breakdown of trust. He saw people turning on each other, fighting over scarce resources, driven by fear and desperation. He saw institutions crumbling, governments failing to provide basic services, and a general sense of chaos and anarchy. The guide explained that this vision represented the consequences of unchecked greed, unsustainable consumption, and a system that prioritized profit over people. It was a depiction of the Titanic, the large, seemingly unsinkable structures of the global economy, collapsing under the weight of their own flaws. The message wasn't about predicting a specific economic crash, but about highlighting the fragility of systems built on unsustainable foundations. It was a warning about the dangers of prioritizing short-term gain over long-term stability, of valuing material wealth over human well-being. The scene shifted, and David found himself witnessing a different kind of devastation. He saw vast fields of crops withered and dry, the earth cracked and parched from prolonged drought. He saw raging wildfires consuming forests and homes, leaving behind a trail of ash and destruction. He saw coastal cities inundated by rising sea levels, their streets flooded, their buildings submerged. He saw hurricanes of unprecedented intensity tearing through communities, leaving behind a wake of devastation. He saw earthquakes leveling cities, reducing buildings to rubble. and burying countless people beneath the debris. The guide explained that these visions represented the consequences of humanity's disregard for the environment, the unsustainable practices that had disrupted the natural balance of the planet. It was a depiction of the interconnectedness of all things, how economic instability, environmental degradation, and social unrest were all intertwined. He saw images of starving children, their bodies emaciated, their eyes hollow with despair. He saw refugees fleeing their homes, seeking safety and sustenance, but finding only more hardship and suffering. It was a stark reminder of the human cost of environmental destruction and the unequal distribution of resources. The message was clear: humanity could not continue to exploit the planet and its resources without facing dire consequences. The vision shifted again, becoming even more harrowing. David saw images of crowded hospitals, overwhelmed with patients suffering from a deadly and contagious disease. He saw people wearing masks, their faces filled with fear, trying to protect themselves from an invisible enemy. He saw scientists working tirelessly to find a cure, but the disease spread rapidly, overwhelming healthcare systems and causing widespread panic. The guide explained that this vision represented the vulnerability of a globalized world to pandemics, the consequences of neglecting public health infrastructure, and the dangers of misinformation and distrust. The scene shifted once more, and David found himself witnessing the horrors of war. It wasn't a conventional war with clearly defined battle lines, but a chaotic and brutal conflict that spread like a wildfire, engulfing entire regions. It started, as the guide explained, with a spark of conflict of religions and small disputes in the Middle East. The fights spread across, escalating across all of Asia. He saw cities reduced to rubble, innocent civilians caught in the crossfire, and the widespread use of brutal and indiscriminate weapons. He saw the faces of soldiers, young men and women, their eyes filled with fear, hatred, and the trauma of witnessing unspeakable atrocities. He understood communism countries were the fuel to this fire. The guide explained that the conflict would eventually be contained, stopping its spread in the East Sea, but the damage would be immense and the scars would run deep. The guide made it clear that this was not a prediction of a specific war, but a symbolic representation of the destructive power of hatred, division, and the pursuit of power at all costs. The old ideologies, built on control and oppression, would crumble, unable to withstand the rising tide of human consciousness seeking freedom and unity. It emphasized that war was never the answer, that it only perpetuated a cycle of violence and suffering. The old communist regimes, represented by the encroaching conflict, would ultimately fail. Swept away by the forces of change, the vision ceased, leaving David shaken and overwhelmed by the intensity of what he had witnessed. He found himself once again in the presence of the luminous being he perceived as Jesus. This figure did not present himself as a conquering king or a wrathful judge, but as a presence of pure love and compassion. Jesus did not endorse the visions as literal prophecies of events to occur in 2025. Instead, he explained that they represented potential outcomes, pathways that humanity could choose based on its current trajectory. He emphasized that these were not predetermined events, but rather consequences of choices, both individual and collective. These are not foretold conclusions, the figure communicated, his thoughts resonating with profound love, but rather illustrations of the paths that lie before you. The future is not fixed. It is a tapestry woven with the threads of every thought, every action, every decision made by every soul on earth. The message was not one of doom and gloom, but of hope and responsibility. Jesus emphasized the power of love, compassion, and unity to overcome the darkness. He spoke of the importance of forgiveness, of letting go of hatred and resentment, of building bridges of understanding across divides. He explained that the 3,000-year golden age was not a literal period of time, but a state of being, a potential for humanity to evolve, to awaken to its true nature, to live in harmony with itself and with the planet. It was not something that would be imposed from above, but something that would emerge from within, through a collective shift in consciousness. The kingdom of God is within you, the figure conveyed. It is not a place, but a state of being. It is found in the love you share, the compassion you show, the kindness you extend to all beings. It is built not with bricks and mortar, but with acts of selfless service and unwavering faith in the power of good. David was told that he must return to his earthly life and share this message, not as a prophet of doom, but as a messenger of hope. He was to encourage others to choose love over fear, unity over division, and to live their lives with purpose and intention. The return was abrupt and disorienting. He felt a wrenching sensation, a being pulled back into his physical body, followed by an explosion of pain. He gasped for air, his lungs burning, his body throbbing. He was lying on a hospital bed, surrounded by beeping machines and the concerned faces of doctors and nurses. The initial days in the hospital were a struggle. David's physical injuries were severe, requiring surgery and extensive rehabilitation. But the greater challenge was the internal turmoil, the struggle to reconcile his extraordinary experience with the mundane reality of his life. He tried to explain what he had seen and heard to the medical staff. He spoke of the light, the love, the visions, and the message from Jesus. Dr. Ramirez, his attending physician, listened patiently, but her expression remained skeptical. She attributed his experience to hypoxia, the effects of the anesthesia, and the psychological trauma of his near-death experience. "David," she said gently, "you've been through a lot. Your brain was deprived of oxygen for a significant period. It's not uncommon for patients in your situation to report unusual experiences. These are often vivid and emotionally powerful, but they are not necessarily real. In the way we understand reality." His children, Emily and Ben, visited him regularly, their presence a source of comfort and strength. But when he tried to share his experience with them, he saw confusion and concern in their eyes. They were too young to understand, and he didn't want to frighten them. His ex-wife, Sarah, was supportive but cautious. "I'm glad you're alive, David," she said, "but you need to focus on your recovery. These visions, maybe they were just dreams." The most disheartening reaction came from Pastor Johnson, the minister of the church David had occasionally attended. David had hoped for understanding, perhaps even validation, from a man of faith. Instead, he was met with polite dismissal. "David," Pastor Johnson said, his voice measured, "I understand you've had a profound experience, but the Bible warns against false prophets and misleading visions. We must be careful not to stray from the established teachings of the church." David felt isolated and misunderstood. He began to doubt himself, questioning the reality of his experience. Was it all just a hallucination, a product of his injured brain? He was tempted to become a prophet, to shout his warnings from the rooftops. But something held him back. The message he had received was not about predicting the future, but about changing the present. It was about living a life of love and compassion, not about spreading fear and panic. Slowly, painstakingly, David began to rebuild his life. He focused on his physical recovery, attending physiotherapy sessions and gradually regaining his strength. He returned to his plumbing business, finding solace in the familiar routines of his work. But something had shifted within him. He was no longer the same man who had collapsed under that sink. His near-death experience had stripped away the superficial layers of his life, revealing the core values that truly mattered. He started small. He made a conscious effort to be more present with his children, listening to their concerns, sharing their joys, and offering them unconditional love. He reached out to his ex-wife, offering a sincere apology for any past hurts and expressing his gratitude for their shared children. He became more involved in his community. He volunteered at a local soup kitchen, serving meals to the homeless and offering a kind word to those in need. He joined a community garden project, working alongside his neighbors to cultivate food and build a sense of connection. He didn't preach about his visions or try to convince anyone of his experience. Instead, he lived the message he had received. He treated everyone he met with kindness and respect, regardless of their background or beliefs. He practiced forgiveness, letting go of old grudges and resentments. He sought out opportunities to serve others, to make a positive difference in the world. However small, he found that his actions spoke louder than any words. People were drawn to his quiet strength, his genuine compassion, his unwavering optimism. He became a source of inspiration to his family, his friends, and his community. One evening, David was working late in his shop, repairing a broken pipe. He was tired, but he felt a deep sense of satisfaction. He was doing honest work, providing a valuable service, and making a living for himself and his children. He paused for a moment, looking out the window at the city lights twinkling in the distance. He thought about the visions he had seen, the potential for darkness and destruction. But he also thought about the message of hope, the power of love to overcome fear, the potential for humanity to create a better world. He knew that the future was uncertain, that challenges lay ahead, but he was no longer afraid. He had seen the darkness, but he had also seen the light, and he knew with absolute certainty that the light was stronger. He smiled, a quiet, confident smile, and returned to his work, his hands steady, his heart filled with a profound sense of peace. He was just a plumber, an ordinary man, but he was doing his part, one pipe, one act of kindness, one moment of connection at a time. And that, he realized, was enough. The small boat was steady, and he was sailing towards the dawn.